In today's video, I'm reacting to Brad Maverick's 12-month result after his hair transplant in Turkey. He went to Serkan Aygin Hair Transplant Clinic where they're operating more patients per day than there are people shopping at your grocery store right now. Is it good or bad? Well, after watching this video, you will definitely know. We already covered Brad's Maverick hair transplant in my 4-month update video, which I highly suggest you guys to check out because I covered some issues like harvesting too high up from the donor zone for the first hair transplant when they went kind of beyond the safe donor zone, and then also harvesting too many grafts for what he actually needed. It was like 2,400 grafts, and I concluded that it was actually too much for what was necessary. Before we start with this video, as always, quick shout out to our sponsor GoFiber. These are hair building fibers you can use to mask any thinning or patchy areas on your scalp to make your hair look thicker and better. So make sure you check out the link in the video description below where you can visit GoFiber, get a free sample of your choice, and try them out. See if you like them.
365 days of growing my hair since my hair transplant. Yes, guys, it is June 4th. It's officially 1 full year since I got at the Dr. Serkan Aygin Clinic in Istanbul, Turkey. So as you can see, I think it's grown out quite nicely. I like the shape of the hairline, and yeah, it's pretty long. It's probably like, I don't know, 5 or 5.5 inches.
All right, guys, I'm gonna stop that video right here. The first thing that you notice about this hairline, positive or negative, I don't know. Comment below right now. What is that word? I'm really looking forward to what you guys will think, like the very first impression when looking at this hairline.
And yeah, it's pretty long. It's probably like, I don't know, 5 or 5.5 inches right now there in the front. And also in the back, it's healing up super nicely. I don't think there's like any trace that I've got a hair transplant at all.
Now, we have already seen that his donor recovered fairly quickly on his 4-month update right here, where he actually showed his donor at a much shorter hair length. If we look at it from here, as you can see here, it's actually much better to evaluate whether the donor got over-harvested or whether there's some patchy growth or gaps, ideally when you have like shorter hair like this. That's looking actually quite all right. Now, I would consider Brad quite an early grower. Now, who is an early grower? It's somebody who sees already more than 40% of hair regrowth after 4-month mark. Usually you get that scale from your doctor, like he tells you like 4 months mark, you get 40%, 5 months, 50%, 6 months, 60%, and so on. If we look at his situation during this 4th-month mark update, it's already looking quite good. You can actually see that, okay, well, this is actually the shape that has been there since the 4-month mark. So that's why I consider him to be an early grower. So here we can see he pulls that hair backwards. In terms of the shape, we can obviously see a new shape, like very kind of straighter looking hairline, which is very, has that regular, straightness to it. One thing that needs to be noted is that the mid-frontal point, the center of his hairline, this is actually his existing hair. They did not lower the hairline in the middle, so they actually dense packed all across his existing hair section. So they actually went all the way here and grafted that area. So overall, it was like this, the strip that we have seen before. So that was totally unnecessary, which is something that normally doctors are not doing so aggressively. They usually wait for these candidates to develop more baldness. And then what they do, they restore entirely kind of, new transplanted hairline a little bit ahead of that balding zone. But in Brad's case, you can see that quite a, big area, maybe a third of his grafts, went actually on the area where there was existing hair in it that looked actually quite good, that actually looked quite healthy to me when he had his buzz cuts right here. So the only areas where there was like complete baldness before were those corners, the receding corners. So these are actually the areas where you want to judge that result. The skill of the doctor in this case will be exposed on the left and right side where there was like no hair.
So it took a couple tries. At first they brought it a little bit lower than I wanted it to be, so I asked them to move it up to where my actual hairline lays naturally.
Yeah, he did a very good decision with that, because imagine he would have led the clinic to position his hairline even lower than he has today. That would be super inappropriate in the long run for him, because right now he already has quite narrow forehead. If we talk about like the rule of thirds, it's already looking more than a narrow. Always be careful when clinics are kind of pushing you to go for a lower hairline, especially you need to think about, okay, how am I gonna look with this in my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And you know, if you make it higher, it's always easier to make it lower in the next hair transplant. But if you want to do it lower, it's harder. It's gonna be harder to make it higher. It's possible, but it's more expensive. It's harder. It can create more scarring and so on.
Doctor, bring your hairline lower than where your hairline naturally is. That's going to waste way too many grafts. The
Correct.
doctor originally wanted to do 2,600 grafts.
Wow, that's a lot for this. Imagine putting 2,600 grafts on that. Like, that's totally wrong. That's too much. That's way too much.
Grafts. And this really seemed like a lot to me, because when I got the FaceTime consultation, they said maybe like 12 or 1,400. And this is what I thought was more congruent with what some of my friends had gotten who had similar hairlines to me.
That's the quote what you would have been quoted by, you know, any doctor in the US, you know, for a similar balding, like, okay, maybe 1,200, 1,400 grafts. And that's actually what the clinic quoted him during the call. But once he came there, it happened to be like 2,400, 2,600, and that it seems like he was able to make it on 2,200 because they were unable to go lower than 2,200, which is, again, to me, it's a sign of inefficiency. This is the sign that they cannot be graft efficient, and they need to rely on inflating the numbers too high so they can get that density. So of course you can get a high density if you just take so many grafts on a small area, but who is the best, who is an artist? It's somebody who can make it look great, full, natural, indetectable with fewest amounts of grafts. That's something that I consider appropriate in that case too. I wouldn't go more than 1,500 in this case.
And then we went and did the procedure. It's a well-oiled machine. It's like an assembly line. Everybody has a job to make it go very smoothly and efficiently.
Yeah, they do like up to 40 surgeries a day at this clinic. So yeah, assembly line is a good metaphor for this.
Now, one thing I did notice is that there was, at the very front line of the hairline, there was a bit of a gap between the first row and the rest of the rows behind it. And I know that they do this to kind of blend it in, but I feel like maybe it would look better if there was just a few more hairs planted in between this, because the gap does seem perhaps a little...
Yeah, the gap is too extensive in my opinion as well, considering, again, how many grafts did they waste on his, little, Norwood 2 appearance. That's, to me, definitely, it should have looked much more fuller, and there should have been more grafts in that white channel as he drew it. Filling more hairs in that white channel could actually make the whole transition more seamless, because right now it looks like, maybe some singles in the front, and then there is a space, and then there are some doubles and triples behind. So there are also some areas in the hairline where the density looks pretty good and it's looking fuller, and then there are some other areas like this where it's looking a little bit gappy and lighter, like for example here and here, which actually makes it look more detectable. So actually what would be better in this case to have this type of density all across the hairline, left and right. That would have been the best thing. But what I'm seeing is that it actually doesn't sustain the same density. One thing that he could consider right now is filling out those gappy areas that he mentioned as the white channel that doesn't have a lot of hair in it, and put some singles there. Maybe it could be 150, 200, 250 single grafts placed inside of that channel there, and that could do the trick. But again, if you look at his hair from afar, be it at this hairstyle, be it at this short hairstyle, you cannot see those things, right? Even if I come here, and you can see me from here, you cannot really see anything in my hairline besides like the hairline being like densely packed all across. But of course, once you look a bit close up, you can start seeing some, some things in the hairline that are looking maybe not as regular, and that's exactly what we are seeing with him. So again, be aware that he's exposing his hairline a lot, and that's not how most people will be looking at his hairline,
They don't look very dense, and they are quite reach that between 12 and 18 months. This is where it doesn't seem quite as obvious. Now, I believe that the new transplanted hairs are in the catagen phase, which means they're not fully developed yet. That would be the androgen phase. So they say that you should reach that between 12 and 18 months. This is where you will start seeing kind of the final result.
Again, this is a common tactic of hair transplant doctors, like, hey, if you have not got the regrowth you hoped for by the 12-month mark, just wait 6 more months. It can still happen that the regrowth will be delayed. And sometimes you can use minoxidil, sometimes maybe if you are a smoker and the growth may be delayed. If you have some autoimmune conditions, then it may be delayed. But if you're a healthy guy and you actually got a very early regrowth like Brad got at the 4th-month mark, it will be very hard, very unlikely also to get more regrowth or substantial regrowth on the after 12-month mark. So in this case, this is not going to be the case in my opinion. This is the final result based on from what I have seen, based on my previous hair transplants. And I was also quite an early grower too with my first surgery. So I know how this can change or not change beyond the 12-month mark.
It's been exactly 12 months today. And as you can see, the hairs are still pretty fine. They don't look very dense and they are quite frizzy and kinky. Now I've been researching and I've got mixed reviews if this is normal or not, the kinkiness, the frizziness. So I'm really hoping that they start to straighten out eventually. But right now it looks like a lot of the shafts are fully frizzy from base to tip. So I really hope that
yeah, the kinkiness, the frizziness, that will definitely even out once the hair that has been implanted grows out a certain length. Maybe it's going to grow for a year, 2 or 3, until it reaches its new telogen phase when it's going to fall out and then starts growing again in the new anagen phase. And it's always the second anagen phase after you got a hair transplant where your transplanted hair starts growing very natural, close to your existing hair in terms of texture, color. For me, it was usually around the 2-year mark where that started to happen.
Because right now to style my hair, I have to take my product and kind of like flatten and hide the frizzy parts under.
So overall, he seems to be quite happy with the hair transplant, and that's what matters at the end of the day, besides some issues in his hairline that he's noticing, but some of them will get better over time. And interesting thing was also that some of you guys need to know that he was actually texted by the clinic.
But then out of the blue, this doctor named Dr. Sircon Aging Clinic reached out to me and wanted to work with me and provide me with the hair transplant.
So actually, he didn't want to have a hair transplant like yet. It was because the clinic reached out to him and like maybe made his sense of urgency of getting a hair transplant a little bit, you know, more pronounced. So it would be interesting to know if the clinic had not reached out to him, if he would have waited maybe a couple more years and then got the hair transplant eventually. In my opinion, I would have definitely waited. At his position, I wouldn't have rushed into the hair transplant so early, because if we looked at his, you know, pre-operation pictures with long hair, you can't really tell that he's that balding, right? So you can still style your hair so well that many people will not even notice it, and even makes you feel good that you have still good head of hair. And that's why it's great to wait for a hair transplant until you become the ideal candidate. Talking about ideal candidates, talking about how to get your hair transplant the ideal weight, maximize your hair transplant success, avoid all the pitfalls, hundreds of hours of research online, how to get your hair transplant the best way, what's the best clinic for your hair type, for your expectations and budget. For all that, there is my one-on-one help. It's a consulting service that I'm offering on my website. If you click the link below, you'll be able to book in a time and date that you like, where I can guide you personally throughout all these things and help you out. It will be my pleasure to help you out in person, and see you soon in another video.